And that means that all of the technical people are the musicians, without which, of course, there would be no music. So everybody plays a part. The next section, I don't know where they are in the orchestra. It's the finance roundtable. So please welcome to the stage the investors. We have Estelle Godard from Promus Ventures, Nicod from Expansion, and Alex Godlewski from ESRIC. And this will be moderated by Daniel Biedermann from NewSpace Capital.
Okay, thanks very much, Lisa, for the introduction. And, you know, Lisa, I was very encouraged on the first day when you talked about finance and investment taking center stage. Now here we are in the last panel, but okay, we will promise we do the best out of it. So, as already introduced, my name is Daniel Biedermann. I'm an investment partner in NewSpace Capital. We are based here in Luxembourg, and we invest into the space ecosystem at a later stage. And I have here my fantastic colleagues. The panel was entitled The Investment Framework Around Space Resources. Rather than really going and deep into the universe, we decided we actually focus here today on the lunar economy. And so let's get started and hopefully have an interesting discussion. So maybe I start with Marie. When you think about the lunar ecosystem, what does that mean for you as an investor? I mean, is that science fiction? Is it an unknown? Is it already an opportunity? How you guys at Expansion look at this?
Well, it's not science fiction anymore, but it's a bit too long-term to be an immediate opportunity. However, it's a concept taking shape, and we're interested in looking at that in a way that an economy is a system able to create value and to increase capital, financial and technical capital by itself. So it will take steps. First, probably more like a public command economy, and then going further and further to a mixed economy, as we know on Earth, for instance. And we have to focus on, is it for Earth, is it for Moon by itself, or is it for another perspective? That's a lot of questions. However, it's interesting to look at that because it's not so far away. I think in the next decade, 2035, when we look at, for instance, DARPA's perspective, something will happen there.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, maybe moving to Estelle. So what triggers actually, what would be triggering events that would make you pay more attention to the lunar economy and the projects that are presented?
I think there's several things, obviously. First, there's a number of scientific breakthrough that could help lower prices, lower access to the moon, and improve kind of the technologies that are going to get there. That would help us kind of believe in some new projects and new opportunities that could become worthwhile for actors on Earth to look at and to invest in. But on the way to get there, we obviously also look at companies that already think about developing robotic solutions, also communication solutions or navigation solutions that can be applied on the moon, that work towards developing this new economy on the moon, but that already have some application on Earth as well, and that can generate pre-revenues on Earth and demonstrate some technical prowesses. We have one of our portfolio companies, Lunar Outpost, that's based in Luxembourg, actually, and they have this kind of dual approach of addressing, on the one hand, rovers on the moon and developing robotic solutions there, but they also address kind of terrestrial applications, and I think that's a way to address the lunar economy in a way that it can also already provide us with some prospects for return on investments early on.
Okay. So, I mean, if I'm building on that, when investors, when projects presenting to you, and I mean, Alex and myself, we worked together before in NewSpace Capital, and we had a lot of projects coming in. I think there are a couple of common pitfalls that maybe projects do. I think you mentioned now just this connection between what happens on Earth and then what happens on the moon, and making that correlation to make sure the lights stay switched on until something really happens on the moon. Well, maybe Alex, a few common pitfalls that you see when you do investment appraisals and you look at projects that I think will be quite useful for potential entrepreneurs here in the room to know what investors will be looking for.
Yeah, just to build up on what Estelle shared. Yeah, we're talking about lunar economy because essentially we know that the moon is going to be the first celestial body where you will see economic activities. They're already happening. And then the second aspect is I think it's more inclusive to the enablers, the applications which actually support what we're going to do with space resources. So to answer your question, like the pitfalls, the way we look at this, especially with the market assessment I'm now conducting for ESA, is I think one common pitfall is to come with a solution without a problem. And this is a down-to-earth approach or terrestrial link or space link that you need to have to essentially build up either on a case which is supported by an anchor customer, which is currently mostly driven by space agencies, or actually technologies which are terrestrial, which are moon compatible, and that we could invest now in order to have a moon ready in the future.
Thanks, Alex. So, assuming they come across these pitfalls, so what's the topics that you think will be the first ones that could become appealing? I mean, we hear a lot about space resources, but space resources can mean many things. It can mean water, it can be in fuel, it can be in electricity, it can mean food. It can mean silicon. So it can be navigation, communication. So what's your perspective on that, Marie?
Well, I think lots of things could happen, but from an investor point of view, we have to balance every time between risk and opportunities. So if I mention opportunities, it would be like the operational functions. Why do we go on the moon? So probably one main event would be to define, okay, I'm sure that this kind of resource or this kind of application will change our view on Earth and on the moon later. So you spoke about, for instance, silicon wafers or, for instance, helium or stuff like that. Now we can exploit it and that now we can go there. So we will focus on the opportunity and then find a way to manage that, as they did in the Far West with the gold, for instance. And on the other way, we will focus on the risk and say, okay, to do all that, we need a lot of support, a lot of infrastructures. And so probably one part of us would say, okay, I like communication, I like transportation, I like navigation, people able to work together on the same standards and stuff like that. So I think it will be like more of an iteration in between this risk and opportunities to, in the end, reduce as much as possible the level of uncertainty and be sure that we keep going and progress on that respect.
Maybe I pass on the same question to the other two panelists. Estelle, any hot topics that you start seeing appearing and people come to pitch to you about it?
Yeah, I think, what makes sense, and especially as VCs, is that we want to back visionary founders and teams that are going to be able to address specific topics. And especially for the lunar economy, which is still kind of far away. I mean, we're still not there yet, but what we're looking at is really bricks of technologies that have a huge commercial potential and that can develop onto other sectors, onto other domains, and unlock new markets. And we want to see early on kind of this vision and those step-by-step approach that will lead one founder, one company to some potential return within the time frame of our fund. And I think that's something that's going to be...
Your fund is, tell us maybe a little bit about the time frame you're looking at.
I mean, we typically invest early stage, so from seed, sometimes pre-seed to Series A, which means that we mostly invest in teams and in the capacity of founders to really execute and hire talents and raise funding to get them to sustainable revenues and exit for us. And we're also going to look for ownerships, especially for projects that have high capex needs, to make sure that we are going to receive the piece of our pie in the end as the company grows and gets onto subsequent rounds of fundraising. So those are generally aspects that we consider and that we take as granted when we look at companies, but that companies may not necessarily have in mind when they go and pitch to investors. But we, especially for domains like the lunar economy, where it's far away, not necessary, but it's going to require a lot of amounts of funding. The market is not necessarily ready. There's going to be a need for alignment between market opportunity and revenue generation, and also long-term perspectives in terms of the business development of the company.
Okay. Alex, something to add on your side?
Yeah, maybe just to complement. Look, the way I look at the value chain and the market consideration here is we should distinguish two parts of a value chain. So you have the upstream part, which is currently where you find companies which are economically viable, driven by space agencies, contracts. And it is often omitted when we look at the value chain, but it is critical. We need launchers, satellites, orbital stations, landers, rovers to have the access to the moon. And so here, I think, in terms of application that we could see, there would definitely be, and the fellow investor panelists that we have here have made some investment in Earth observation. So I believe that in order to enable applications on the moon, we need to observe, think about mapping resources, using remote sensing. So I think these are some of the applications that are very interesting and we might see emerging soon. And then there's a downstream part of the value chain, which is applications with space resources as the cornerstone. And here is the link where I believe we can find thousands of companies who are not aware that they are lunar, but they're doing across the supply chain something which is very close to what we would expect them to do on the moon. Look, some terrestrial companies have developed products here. Toyota is developing a lunar cruiser. Nokia is developing a communication system. So this is typically the move that I think we are going to witness in the future.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think there's quite a lot of companies that also we are investing in, which are later stage, but the technology they develop, be it for Earth observation or for navigation or for communication applications, I mean, it's not, it doesn't take really a PhD to think that this can afterwards be also used on the moon. And I believe this is probably part of the first infrastructure that will need to be there. Just imagine here on Earth, we would not have communication, navigation, or observation. I think we will be pretty blind. And assuming that we go to the moon, and thinking that we just go there and establish ourselves without actually that infrastructure as well established, I think is pretty much mission impossible for me. So that's, I think, plenty of opportunities there to see the moon maybe more as just another market or another segment to go after. Right, so I don't know if there's any questions from the room. I get really this spotlight here. I actually can't see anything. I don't know if you see any raising hands. No, seems not the case. So maybe let's just continue on our discussion then amongst ourselves, if you're not interested. In terms of the criteria for investors, I mean, we talked a little bit about that already, but do you see any major differences between assessing a lunar project versus an Earth project? I mean, are there different KPIs that you look at, maybe Marie? And maybe you can talk a little bit about expansion as well, what you do.
Well, KPI, I think we're quite far from that because, as Estelle, we invest in early stage companies from pre-seed to Series A, and sometimes it's not about KPI, it's about the project and the ambition and how it will be scalable and how is the team ready and strong enough to support this ambition up to the end. Sometimes pivoting, why not, but going there. So that's the kind of main criteria, the scalability. With my background, I have a deep interest on the fact that we have a technology, we have a market, but in between there is a real complicated path to make it industrializable, a real product that we can scale, stabilize, and so on. And I think it's really important on the moon because it's the place where you are alone in the dark, as you said, in the cold. And so lots of things will have to be autonomous, really reliable, safe, because it's a dangerous place too.
Yeah.
So I think we could have a real focus on that and all the environmental parameters on the moon, obviously. I would emphasize also 2 points. The first one would be about the ability to create standards, because the first one going there will have to interface then with others, and they will be the first to build stuff there and to be able to interface and to be standardized and to create a new ecosystem, a new world over there. So they have to be flexible and also ready to lead and probably also to lobby on that. And my final point would be about, and for the first steps, it's really important to be able to navigate within public and private financing and also markets and ways of doing. I think it's really huge project. They are long-term projects. And so if I make, for instance, a parallel that some of you already know with the railways in the US in the 19th century, it was private companies, but they relied on corporate bonds, stock bonds, on land grants from the states. Yep. And so it was a really complex and intricate mechanism within these two. Still, it was private, but it was a big project and both working together.
Right. Yeah. I think it's a nice analogy. Alex, I had one question. I had one discussion with a specialist in law, I think from a university in Poland just a minute ago. He's maybe here in the room actually. And one of the question was, and that's related to the panel that we just had before about the legal framework, how do investors think about the legal framework on the moon? We all know it's also a geopolitical drama. I mean, everybody wants to be there first and put their stakes in the ground and claim ownership or territory, or what happens to the stuff that is exploited on the moon? What happens to the fuel that is produced? Who owns that fuel actually? Can you sell it to somebody? So, I mean, on Earth we're used to IP rights and patents, but that's normally driven by national law or European law or international law. I think in space we have so far sort of a very general framework that I think we heard before triggers good behavior or should trigger good behavior. But as a businessman, as an investor, how do we think about this?
Yeah, complex question, and cannot bring the expertise from
Sorry for the curveball.
from a previous panel on that one, but so legal framework is one. There are a couple of factors which will be not in the control of the entrepreneurs or the business people running companies which are moon focused, and this is one which is going to evolve with different frameworks and initiatives which were brought by the people at this conference. I think there's a geopolitical context that you mentioned, which I think is important because it's. I mean, I would somehow put it into the legal box because it's driving some of the objectives that we see with the moon race. And there are also reports mentioning, potential dual use case, this time not Earth, Moon, but military, civil. And I think this is also going to be a topic of how to address that or what are the possible scenarios when it comes to applications there. And then the other points which are somehow related also to the legal aspect is the astronauts, right? I mean, what will be the profile and the number of astronauts that we will see on the surface of the moon, because this will be a strong demand driver for all the downstream application that we will see. Actually, this one and another one which I think will follow a similar trend that we've seen in the space industry, which is essentially the flights. So if we see a decrease of the costs and flights to the moon become a certain form of routine, this is another driver which will stimulate applications there. So try to avoid answering a question, but I hope I brought at least into perspective what I think are the legal factors to take into consideration and the other demand drivers which are, aside from technical and commercial maturity, not completely under control of private sector.
Yeah, and I don't know, Estelle, maybe you have something to add to that, but I mean, from my experience, the legal and regulatory framework is always an important chapter in due diligence when you look at a company. For the moment, I would not know where to look for, actually, if now somebody tells me they will establish a navigation network around the moon. How is that, legally framed? I don't know. So I don't know. Have you come across something like that, projects like that?
I mean, I'm not sure. Like, I think especially as a VC investors, there's many projects with which we come across where regulations is not necessarily ready. And I think we've seen it for a number of technologies and applications where companies have emerged, developed, and regulation was not yet there, not yet ready, and it came afterwards, and then companies had to adapt and evolve. And probably that's what's going to happen with the moon, because we cannot necessarily imagine what's going to get there, where is it going to be, and what are going to be the conflicts amongst the different countries. On the other hand, what we can look at and what we can try to analyze is amongst the different technological bricks that are going to get to the moon and that we are going to need in order to set up this new lunar economy, which are the ones that are venture backable and which are the ones that should be more infrastructure-driven, government-driven, and where there could be some involvement through public-private partnerships, but not necessarily purely venture capital funded. And those are kind of analogies that we can put that we can make already with some sectors on Earth. I mean, transportation is one. I think autonomous driving can also be another one. So, yeah, not necessarily. I think regulation is a huge part, but especially for communication programs, I think there's a number of call for ideas, call for tenders that are already kind of set up by government entities and by the European Commission, the EIC, as we saw this morning, that can already kind of lead us towards some kind of path there. But here, I mean, I would say I'm going to focus more on the ability of the team to execute and to foresee those kind of events and adapt, rather than saying, okay, regulation is not there. I don't know. We're here to take risks in the end.
So I guess what you're in a way saying is you just added to the risk profile that when you look at an investment case.
Yeah.
Is that the way you would look at that? It's just,
Yeah.
even on Earth, early companies might not have the right legal framework. So basically, you just look at the risk profile and you discount accordingly.
And I mean, sorry. No, just to complement. I mean, I think it depends also. Like, if the company's revenues is dependent on a regulation. So if the company is waiting for a regulation in order to have the market set up, then that's more complex than if regulation can have an impact. I mean, there's different risks associated to that, but yeah, it's going to impact the way that we think about it. And
yeah, so Marie,
yeah, I
add something.
To add on what Estelle said, I think it's really about the mindset and the capability of the team to anticipate that there will be something, to be ready for that, even if nobody knows, and to say, okay, how do I manage with that in my, for instance, in the development plans? With civil aviation, we all know that you have to be certified and so on. So for this kind of project, not so obvious, but you can always find some milestone or some stuff in the development and industrialization plan when you can say, okay, at that time, if something happened, I can do this or do that. That's the kind of mindset I would expect. And also in the business plan, I think we all know that business plan at the beginning of a company is quite something, but it's a hope something. But for this kind of project, I think we could probably multiply by 3 or 5 all the costs and everything and the schedules. But still, I think it would be nice to have somewhere in the business plan a line saying, okay, I make provisions for something that will happen. It shows that I assume that there will be something happening. I'm ready for that. And then it will go. It's not about the figure inside. It's just about the fact that we think about the
Yeah, I think that's good advice also for the entrepreneurs here in the room to make provisions for unforeseen factors and timelines, which are normally much longer than initially anticipated. Maybe staying on schedule and timeline, how do you see opportunities? I think we all investors that sort of think in relatively short-term frames in terms of investing and then getting out of that. Do you see that as a hurdle for you as a venture capitalist to say, well, I don't want to wait for 10 years before this moon project materializes after 3-5 years. I want to make my exit. So I don't know. Is that a hurdle? Would you?
Yeah, of course, we'll have to find some milestones, intermediate milestones. As you mentioned previously, I think one nice way to manage is to have application on Earth, either a formal application on Earth and then we go to the moon, or intermediate step in a development plan saying, okay, this one I can use on Earth and make profits. So that's a way to make people wait in a, in a nice way. And also, we can also, as early stage investor, expect that the company grows and is credible enough to gain some contract or some first steps with public institution, and then go on and go on. and so the valuation increase, and so next level investors would be ready to take over. And that's also a nice way to build, each one build its part in a trajectory.
Alex, anything to add?
Yeah, if I may jump in on this, I think it's an interesting topic also to share with the audience. I mean, investors have a time horizon of roughly 10 years. And so obviously there are two guiding principles, right? There's financing and liquidity. You will get financing only if you have customers. So, which is why we need to identify the relevant customers across the value chain. For most of the companies we're talking about, we know that it's the public sector, so we need to strengthen, I think, the private-public partnerships here. And the second event is the exit. And with the exit, I think what is interesting is that by bringing on board terrestrial companies and having like new moon players, I think we create conditions which will be interesting in the future to see how we can combine the best of the different technologies to address these new use cases. And that's, I mean, partly the mission now we're doing at ESRIC is to find the tool who can support with financing companies, and at the same time find those who are serving terrestrial application, but which could in the future support this economy.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, the clock is already dark red, so this is all we have time for. Thanks very much to the panelists for the interesting discussion, and thanks for your attention. Back to you, Lisa.
Time where she started, so she'll finish. We have to invite Catherine back onto the stage to wrap up everything. And I'm really delighted to see so many people back in the room.